Okay, today we're going to talk about rock molds, the one specifically by Bragdon Enterprises. I'm sure most of you guys have seen it at the Puyallup Train Show. That's the only place I've ever seen him. Probably at other train shows that I haven't been to. Basically, in a nutshell, it's a plasticky type coating backed with a two-part foam epoxy using standard rubber molds. You can buy them or you can make them yourself if you choose. I bought all these, plus I borrowed some from Tyler and I borrowed some from Rod. We'll go through the quick steps of prep work, although I have some pre-prepped so you don't have to wait for the dry time and everything, and then we'll just pour a mold and go over a couple do's and don'ts that I've since learned about, and we'll go from there. So, you get a fresh mold. If it's brand new, make sure you coat it with a mold release agent that they provide. It's called Magic Bullet. Coat both sides because you will get it on both sides and it helps it get off. What I do is take a spray bottle, kind of spritz or two, and simply just work it in with your fingers into all the crevices as best you can. And then when you get all that done, and no, I'm not going to do the whole thing, we're just going through an example. You can let it dry. Because of my work schedule, I usually do this at night when I get home from work. In the morning, I'll spray paint it, which is the next step. And then when I get home from work the next day, I'll make my pours. So the next step is you get some white spray paint, satin or gloss, enamel, and then you paint it like that. You know, like that, like these here, like these. The beauty of this is you don't have to use the whole mold. You can just use a section of it if you like a big mold like this. You can just use a part of it, the center, whatever you like to use. Like these, I really like the jaggedy rocks here, so I make strips here. I don't necessarily use this section. At least that's what I'm doing now. But when you paint it, you know, just like standard paint, you paint it, you know, just like you're supposed to. Turn it, and you want to get it from all four angles so you cover as much of it as possible. What this does is it gives it a tooth for the finished product once it's on your layout. I think it does give it a tooth for the final, because when you actually get them installed and paint them or weather them, you can use paints, chalks, washes. You know, there's an airbrush. I think like anything else, it's kind of like a primer maybe. You do have to put some gesso on it first sometimes. In fact, you should. The kit comes with a bottle of gesso, so you should do that too. If you're a painter, like artsy painter, you probably know what gesso is. I've found that sometimes I needed it, sometimes I didn't. I use it all the time now. Some do's and don'ts, we can cover that real quick. When you make these pours, depending on the thickness, like these are kind of flat here, but then here you got some deep ridges. Here you got a lot of crevices and ridges. Here's flat, but a little more ridges than, like, say, in these areas. You want your pour a little thicker, otherwise you get stuff like all these voids. Or these voids, and get real flimsy. So I've been pouring them a little thicker. The flatter it is, you can do a little thinner. Ultimately, it's experimentation, just like anything else. As you're doing it, my first batch came into a glob. I should have kept it because I didn't think of this at the time, but yeah, it came into a big old glob and went in the trash can. But finished products basically look, you know, here's a finished one that looks pretty good. Use the foam as a reinforcement to help stabilize it. We'll touch base on foam, and I'll show you what to and not to do when we go to do the pour. I think that kind of covers the prep work. The biggest thing is make sure each coat is dry. If you're in a hurry or you don't want to wait like I do, a hair dryer will help speed the drying process to go to the next step. If you happen to paint it when it's still wet with the mold release, you will get what to me I call fish eyes. It'll look like little pinholes. And here's a good not to do. I apparently did something wrong here, and my paint's peeling and cracking, so that'll have to be redone. Probably because it was raining when I did this. I think we can go to mix and pour. I don't know what these actually are. I could probably read the instructions, but basically what he calls them is cast satin, and it gives it the plastic hard shell. So what you do is, and again, this is trial and error of how much, but the big thing is mix equal amounts. I have found that I can actually make a little more. It doesn't take long to do this, a minute or two to pour it and mix it and then put it on the mold. But the big key is equal amounts as possible. You don't want a full cup and a half a cup or an ounce and a half an ounce. You want it as close to the same amount as possible. Pour them in a bigger cup. And then I use bamboo skewers to stir it. This stuff starts to set pretty quickly. So just stir it for a few minutes, or not even a few minutes, just a few seconds actually. And I'm gonna do an easy mold. And oh, by the way, wear gloves because I forgot to put my gloves on. And just kind of pour it on there. And in this case, it's kind of a shallow one, so we're not gonna do too thick, and then just kind of walk it around. Make sure you put some kind of covering down, because if you get it on, you can see them. Now, if you get too much, what I do is I try to do a couple molds at a time, and I'll actually go over another mold and do this, so any spillage will go onto another mold. In this case, I didn't do that much, so it's not really going to be an issue, but just so you know, you can do that. I have been anyways. But this is the little bit of a time-consuming thing. You want to kind of just keep working it, get it over as many of the ridges as you can. Try not to spill too much. Keep it off your hands. Like I said, I forgot to put my gloves on. And depending on the thickness, it takes 10, 20 minutes maybe to start to set. I like to leave them in a little longer to get a little harder. Especially on the more coarse molds, because they're really soft when they come out, and so therefore they tear. So I've been leaving them in a little longer, and then pretty much you can just let it sit there. Now, I might let it sit there and then come back and shake it around a little bit. Basically, this is what it comes out to. It's like a hard plastic shell. This is all spillage, obviously. Here's kind of a loose sample. That's what it comes out to, and it's pretty soft and pliable. The thinner it is, the thicker it is. You know, obviously it gets stiffer. You can, if your scenery base is ready and you're happy with everything, and the molds fit right, once you take them out, you can right onto the layout, and they'll mold to the shapes and everything. Me personally, what I like to do is I like to make a batch of molds and just let them sit, because I'm cutting and shaping to fit specific applications, and we can go touch base on that in a little bit. Once it fully sets, it's pretty hard. You know, like this. You know, it's still somewhat flexible, but it's pretty hard. The beauty is, take a hairdryer, heat it up, and it'll be moldable again, provided you don't make it way too thick. But it's a pretty easy learning curve. It really is. I thought I was going to be all, oh my God, but like I said, Tyler Whitcomb has helped me. Rod Kirsch has helped me. They've done it. And then, of course, the instructions are pretty thorough from Bragdon on how to do it too. So, but as you can see, I don't know if you can see it, but it's starting to thicken up. It's not really rolling as much. It's hard to tell, but the lighting. So it's starting to thicken up, and we'll just let it kind of do its thing. Okay, while we're letting that do its thing, we'll touch base on installation a little bit. As you can see here, I've got multiple layers of smaller and bigger pieces. Obviously with rocks, you want to try to keep the strata together. I've kind of failed a little bit in a couple spots, but I was riding over in Eastern Washington last week, and I was looking at all the different rock structures, and well, in real life, they're not always symmetrical. So we're gonna go with it and see how it looks when it's done. But basically, what I do is I take a paper template, trace it where I want, transfer it to the mold, outline it with a pen, cut it with either a hot wire or my saw, or by hand if I can, or break it. And then I use an adhesive and I fit it in places. And then once it's set, I use a lightweight spackling compound to fill the gaps. And you can do the same thing between gaps and blend them in. And then when it's all dry, I just paint that to match the background. And then I use the Loctite Power Grab, but any kind of adhesive, if you're using foam, make sure it's foam safe. But then once you get all that done, then you can go ahead and stain your rocks to the color, and then then you go into your scenery, dirt, sand, trees, bushes, and all that stuff. Obviously, we're not there yet. So these are like little pieces, little crevices. Over here, I got bigger pieces, a cliff top, and here you can see where I kind of goofed, and on the other side where I got vertical versus horizontal, so I'm gonna have to try to blend that somehow. One big mold that's been trimmed to fit back there in the corner. As a joke, yeah, I'm kind of wishing I'd modeled Kansas. But this is fun. I mean, it really is. You can do different types of, structures, different types of designs. We'll see how it looks when I'm done. Okay, I actually missed a step, but it's not a big deal, and you don't always have to do that step. But we're going to go ahead and do it anyways now after the fact and show you how it's done. But as you can see, it's still soft and pliable, but it's actually no longer clear. It's opaque or almost fully white. Now, the next step would have been the two-part foam. Now, I learned the hard way, you don't make the same amount of this as you make that. About 1/8 of it or something. So, same thing, equal parts, just a little bit, depending on the size of your mold and everything, but generally, you want to do about 1/8 of whatever resin you poured. That's why I got smaller cups. Again, bamboo stir stick. Stir this one until it's kind of a cream coffee color. And you can do this in two ways. You can do it thin as just a reinforcement, or you can do it thick if you're going to put it in a deeper hole or something. And then just pour it on. Just kind of light. And all this really does is help reinforce it. That's it. And then we'll wait a little bit and you'll see why you don't need that much of it. We can actually touch base. One of my first batches, a little too much foam. And this was cut off of what, that. So it's kind of, so foam goes a long way. Once this is all set, you want to let the foam kind of do its thing. It takes a few minutes for that. Sorry, my screw up on the time. But it'll look like, I think we already showed it earlier, but it'll look something like that. It doesn't have to be perfect. The beauty of this is rocks aren't perfect. So if it's a little pushed out, you can always trim it down if you need to, like I did there. Run it as it is. Like I said, when you heat it up, if you've let it sit, or if you take it right out of the mold and install it, it'll mold to pretty much any contour you want. Pushes it out, pushes it in, you know, I mean, landscape is not flat. And all the gaps and joints that we talked about in there, you can fill in. And I like the lightweight sculpt mold simply because I can actually, it stays soft, so I can actually kind of carve it to match the rocks a little bit, and it takes the paint and stains pretty much as well as this, if not a little better. So it blends in really well, at least in my N-scale layout. We'll see how the O-scale looks. At this point, we can try to remove it, and you want to, you can kind of see how it breaks up a little bit. I think we're ready to take the mold, pull the mold. If it comes out weird, then this is a what not to do video. If it comes out right, it's yay! So basically, when you're ready to pull the mold, start pulling away from the edges, like that. And you can see how it's, can you see that? Mm-hmm. If you pull it too soon, it'll just kind of pull a little bit, or stretch. The edges will crack a little bit because they're the thinnest point. It's okay. Because, you know, the edges, you can blend them into other molds you add to it, or you can trim them off, or if you're going to cut it to a certain shape, it's fine. And then what I like to do, and sometimes it works out okay, is just kind of, and it will stick, see, it sticks a little bit, and just kind of work it off. And try to get it up as quick as possible. Wax paper might be a handy thing. I haven't tried that yet. But you can see how soft and pliable it is. So it will mold. And I don't think it'll ever be this soft and pliable, but boom, there's your mold. But, you know, yeah, we got a couple voids in it. Weeds, a bush, a tree. Well, maybe not a tree, but, you know, you can always cover that with stuff or pack a little dirt in it. And you can see, well, it all kind of stuck, but that's what's supposed to be the reinforcement with the foam. And then I just let them sit there up on the plastic side or the texture side down and let it harden. I make my group of molds, and then when I have enough molds, I go in and start installing. And basically, that's it. And obviously he has different scales. These are Rod Kirsch's molds that he lent me. So you can do different sizes. I mean, this is a cut stone. This looks like a cut stone. Mm-hmm. This looks more like brick.
Brick, yeah, that does look like brick.
And this looks like cut stone. Mm-hmm. I'm doing O scale, so I'm not using these. Well, this is the same one we just poured here. But in this particular case, I did use more foam to give it a lot more rigidity, being as it's a stone wall as opposed to needing to be molded. I will mold the scenery base to fit this, as opposed to normally your rock molds to your scenery. So I did this one kind of intentionally. I still went a little overboard on the foam. I still don't need this much. As you can see, that little half cup of those little ounce cups, after I did pour it in the mold, and that's what we have left. So it gives you a lot of foam. And like I said, that was one of my first two mistakes, was pulled the mold out too soon, used too much foam.